I am Chelsea Arnold, and I am currently a major in the United States Air Force. I'm also a clinical social worker and have my PhD in social work. Today, Dr. O'Gara asked me to talk to you all about military social work. So I hope you enjoy this little presentation. Thanks. As I mentioned, we are going to be talking about military social work today. We'll cover these areas, talk a little bit about military culture, aspects of military social work. We'll do a brief review of family systems and stages of grief, and you'll see why here soon. And then lastly, we'll discuss what it's like to be a deployed social worker. So about me, I grew up in a town in Kentucky called Berea. It's a small liberal arts college town. Great place to visit if you ever want to go to Kentucky. My dad was in the Air Force, and he was a huge reason why I decided to join. I'll talk a little more why I joined, but he was a huge influence for that. I went to University of Kentucky for both my undergraduate and my graduate degree for my master's in social work. However, I did go to the University of Texas at Austin for my PhD, and that is where I met Dr. O'Gara, Jamie. Lastly, I have two dogs. Kai is the golden doodle. He is 8.5 years old. And Mochi is the little Chinese crested mix that I just adopted a month and a half ago, and he is about a year and a half. I really like camping, hiking, yoga, you name it, anything outdoors I really enjoy. And currently I live in Northern California and actually lucky enough to live in Napa, and I am stationed at Travis Air Force Base. All right, so take a moment and just think about or reflect anyone that you know that has served in the military. Or maybe you served in the military yourself. Or maybe even you were a child of a military member. Either way, when I think of military, and especially as a social worker, and before I came in, I thought of old veterans, lots of mavericks and pilots, Forrest Gumps crawling through the swamps of Vietnam, being deployed all the time. Military, that's all I think about that's all I used to think about prior to joining, was that families were always separated from their loved ones because they were deployed overseas while their wives hung back home. And I used to love the show. I think it was called Army Wives. And this was kind of the stereotypical thinking of what military families look like. Wives staying at home, husbands being deployed, along with very sad children because their dads were away from home. What I didn't expect as a social worker in the military were young veterans. They're not always old. You have the younger veterans from Operation Iraq and Afghanistan, and even more modern day warfare. It has people of all kinds. The military is full of women, people of color, and not just men. So quite diverse population. Yes, there are still lots of deployments. However, there are a lot of bases stateside, and a lot of times families spend more time away from their extended families because they're PCS. And as you can see, this map shows all kinds of different Air Force, Army, Navy installations across the U.S. Unlike Army wives, women are the ones serving in the military while their husbands are staying at home. And lastly, we find that children are a little more resilient to their parents being gone or deployed because of the military. So, what is military culture? What all does that encompass? Today, I'm going to use the framework that was published by Dr. Kay Hall in 2011, and she just talks about various characteristics of military culture, and that kind of highlights some areas that I wanted to cover. So, the first characteristic that she broke it down into is questioning why people join. A lot of times, military members join because they're trying to escape something, whether it's a poor home life, limited opportunities, or just financially not having that financial stability to go to school. And so this is just a good opportunity for them to get out and get free education in the long run. For me, as I mentioned, my dad was in the Air Force and he was a huge influence as to why I joined. But I also joined because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I really wasn't ready to get a PhD, and so I decided, hey, why not serve my country? And just turns out that social workers also are in the military, and so I got really lucky with that. And I really wanted to serve the population that was serving our country, and why not be one of them? So Dr. Hall, she does break down the characteristics to seem slightly negative about the military. So I'm going to highlight her characteristics, but then I'm going to highlight some of my own that are not so much negatively geared. So the military does have what you would appear to look like an authoritarian structure. Lots of regulations, rigidity, structure. Um, Individuals and their families really have to conform to the way of the military. And so that can come off as that authoritarian type of culture. There's a lot of isolation and alienation being in the military. You have frequent moves. For me, I've moved, let's see, I spent 1 year in DC. That was my first year in the military. So that was one move. 3 years in Alaska. Um, Two moves. Went to UT Austin as part of a military scholarship to get my PhD. So three, and I'm on my fourth move in Travis Air Force Base, and that is in 8 years. So that is a lot, and it can be very isolating to not only the individuals who are in the military, but also their families. Families being away from their extended families, their parents, their grandparents, um, and then their children not having a consistent environment, and often having to pick up and move and leave their friends, all really culminates to being very isolating. There is a class system. So we have officers and we have enlisted members. I am an officer, I'm a major. And with the officer and enlisted structure, you have what's called a rank structure. Um, Officers tend to lead the organization, whereas enlisted members are your technical experts and tend to be more middle to lower management. Now, as you progress up the chain of command, rank tends to be, both enlisted officers tends to become a little more equal in that senior enlisted and senior officers have to work really much hand in hand with each other. Um, but still, you have the enlisted advising the officer, whereas the officer is making those final decisions. And families are really expected to be familiar with this. It's quite frowned upon to, as you call it, fraternize with enlisted members if you are an officer. So just keeping that all in mind when you are in the military. Mission first. This is a huge reason why the military thrives as it does, is because it's very mission focused, which means that you have to be fully committed, and that often leads to members missing important events. I've heard before military members talk about how they often feel like property of the military, and that's because we kind of are. We are responsible for millions of dollars of equipment and ensuring the safety of our country, and that comes with sacrifice. And I will talk more about COVID later and how that's affected us, but COVID is a really great example because of the concern with COVID, as we all are concerned. The military really focused on protecting us and making sure we don't get sick. And being that I am in the medical field and I work in the hospital, even more strict with traveling to see family, and not wanting to expose our military members that work in the hospital to COVID, because essentially we are responsible for responding to these medical disasters. And if everyone's sick, then that's not going to happen. And then that kind of ties into the last characteristic of Hall's military culture framework, which is preparation for disaster. And similar to COVID, or just any unexpected disaster, which could be death, natural disasters, quick response to war, all of these things really can create major distress within the families and individual members, because you're expected to pick up and go. For me, I just recently got back from responding to a COVID mission in the local area, and I was told on a Monday that I was tasked to go as the behavioral health support, and I left on a Thursday morning. So I had 3 days to pack and get ready and square everything away. So that is just kind of the nature of military culture. So I want to talk about the positive side. All of these things what I just talked about sound quite negative, but I promise there are a lot more positive things to being in the military. For one, feeling that sense of purpose. I know that is one of the things in human nature. We thrive off feeling a sense of purpose in life, and that gives us the motivation to live our day to day. And so that's what the military really does offer a lot of individuals, is that sense of purpose, and knowing that you are serving your country and doing more than maybe you would have done in another career field, or even staying at home. Values. The military really is founded on, at least for the Air Force, integrity, service, excellence, valor, and honor, and all the military services really. And that really has a lot of meaning. Value drives our day-to-day beliefs and how we function as human beings, and whether or not we decide between right or wrong. And I think that is a positive thing to keep you accountable, and that's something the military does offer. Of course, serving. I've mentioned that. Serving your country, serving the men and women who serve the country or serve our country, go overseas, in the medical field. That's really my purpose, is to keep our warriors, our war fighters, healthy, so they can, fight the good fight and to keep us safe. Yes, you are away from your family. However, it is almost its own family. I have made incredible lifelong friends, and you find that it's a different type of family, but one that that military members learned to grow and love. And lastly, it offers stability, stability financially, medically, and really giving you more opportunity for growth and education. As I mentioned, I was really lucky to get a scholarship in provided by the Air Force so I could go to school to get my PhD. And I wouldn't have been given that opportunity if it wasn't for being in the Air Force. So let's talk about what military mental health looks like. So mental health in the Air Force really encompasses seeing your active duty members. Active duty is what I am. You have Reserve and National Guard, but active duty is when you're full-time military versus your Reserve and Guard, who are your, they call weekend warriors or go 2 weeks a year. And so for me, being in mental health, I treat active duty, and then some bases, depending on their mission, will offer services to their families. And just like any mental health, behavioral health therapy, you will treat anxiety, depression. I have offered relationship support, counseling for kiddos with behavioral problems, you name it. We are really expected to have a broad range of understanding for treating different illnesses or stressors for our military members and their families. We have family advocacy. Family advocacy is our program, at least for the Air Force, that manages, we have the prevention side of the house, which is marital family counseling. And then unfortunately, we do have the maltreatment side of the house where we manage any type of maltreatment cases, whether emotional, physical, sexual, and child maltreatment as well. And then depending on what service you're in, we have an alcohol drug abuse prevention program. So for the Navy, it's called Navy Alcohol and Drug Abuse Prevention. Army, it's ASAP. That's that little emblem at the top there. And that's Army Substance Abuse Program. And the Air Force is ADAPT, Air Force Alcohol, Drug Abuse and Prevention Treatment Program. So, like the name says, we treat anybody with any type of substance or alcohol use disorders, and typically for your Air Force, military, active duty folks, that's going to be your DUIs or any type of intoxication issue, or I'm trying to think of what they're called. So any type of intoxication, misdemeanor type is what we help treat. And we also offer prevention. So folks who are starting to be concerned because maybe they've been drinking too much and they just want some assistance, that's where we come in. And then lastly, military mental health expands into the Veterans Affairs, the VA. I have treated some veterans in my current capacity. I have treated more than I have in the past. But typically, those individuals will seek care at a VA clinic. So let's jump into talking about family systems theory. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but family systems theory, essentially we want to think about how these aspects of systems theory plays a role in our military families, and how our military families really affect the entire system, military system. So really, family systems focuses on relationships within the family rather than the individual. All parts of the family system are interconnected. Family members both affect and are affected by other families. When changes occurs to one, all are affected. And then, of course, you have the different subsystems being parental, siblings, parent-child relationships. So I bring this up because all the things I've just mentioned in regards to military culture, as you can see, really can have an impact on the family system. And so it's just good to be familiar with this when continuing our discussion and post discussion of military families and military social work. Another area I want to talk about is Kubler-Ross's grief cycle. And I bring this up because in my last, on my experience, deployed for the behavioral health support team for the COVID mission. I observed that a lot of individuals were experiencing significant grief and loss as a result of supporting these local hospitals and communities. So I think it's really important to be mindful of this cycle and also realize that this isn't a straight line. It is definitely a circular movement. And not everyone's going to initially experience denial. You know, maybe they experience that frustration or sadness in the beginning. So everyone moves through these stages differently, and I really saw that in the field just recently. Okay, so deployment for a social worker. Some things to keep in mind for these individuals that are deployed is that you're often going to have your typical reactions to stress, which can be anxiety for the unknown and the unexpected of what could happen, or for any traumatic event that took place, having some anxiety as a result of that. Sleep and eating difficulties. A lot of individuals really can't sleep because of their anxiety or the constant thoughts of what happened, or just really being so exhausted and fatigued that their body just and mind will not let them sleep. Eating difficulties, that's very similar to how it ties into anxiety and depression too. Just not having an appetite or eating too much and coping with the stress through overconsumption of food. Having concern over reactions, and that just means just really being worried about maybe the way that they're responding isn't the appropriate response. That's kind of common. An example recently with the deployment that I just came back on, I had an individual who had was quite upset because his patient was passing, and because of COVID and all the restrictions, the patient's family wasn't able to visit that member. And so the active duty member set it up where that family could FaceTime with the member in the hospital. And the member told me that they felt extremely overwhelmed and didn't understand why they felt so much grief from this experience. And so just feeling a little concerned over maybe, am I reacting to this the way I should be reacting to this? Withdrawal and isolation is a huge concern. Members tend to, isolate themselves from their families, friends, while they're on the mission, maybe not taking care of themselves, and just really removing themselves from any type of social situation, which can, as we know, lead to depression, even more concerning risk factors that could eventually lead, you would hope not, but could lead to risk of suicide. So that's always a huge concern with these reactions to stress as well. And then lastly, your negative coping. These kind of bleed into the negative coping when reacting to stress, but it also means misuse of alcohol, um, over drinking, maybe stopping normal routines. So no longer exercising, no longer doing the things that you find are a stress relief. Um, but the biggest one I will say that I always observe is an increase in alcohol consumption, and not in a positive manner, obviously, but more as a numbing coping mechanism. So one thing when you are deployed as a social worker in the military is the huge focus really is psychological first aid. Psychological first aid really focuses on ensuring those members are meeting their basic needs, really educating them on healthy stress reactions, and reassuring them that the way they're reacting to this stressful situation is normal. We all react differently, and it is normal to react the way you are too in an abnormal situation. And so just reassuring that, um, and making sure they're eating, sleeping, trying to get some sleep. I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So really just that first level of meeting all those basic needs and then moving up to the safety, and comfort, which is the reassuring that, hey, um, we do have that support for you. You are able to sleep in a safe location. If it's a member that's deployed, just providing that hot meal, that hot, they call it hot in a cot. So a hot meal and a cot to get some sleep. And that really helps members to get through what they're experiencing. And then stabilization, again, that is just reassuring them that this isn't going to last forever, and that providing any type of stability, whether it's that consistent support, maybe for them, maybe every day they do deep breathing, or they are continuing to have a stable routine with running, exercising, reading, or doing something they enjoy. That's also, really important. And then for the provider, it's about being calm, always being that calm and grounding source for that member who is experiencing these acute stress reactions to whatever they're going through. And if, as the social worker, the military social worker, if you're calm, it always helps the member become more calm themselves. Even if it might take a few minutes, that can be a source of comfort. And then this little app, PFA, Psychological First Aid, is something that the military created. And it's just like a little toolkit, and it provides information on all the things that I just talked about. And you can download it for free and check it out if you want to. It's always a great thing to have in your toolkit. It's something that I used quite a bit when I was locally deployed. So speaking of my local deployment, I know I probably should have mentioned this way sooner. I know I kind of touched on it very briefly, but let me tell you a little more about my experience as the COVID-19 relief support. So in this picture, I'm on the right, and then that is my mental health tech on the left, and we are just doing behavioral health rounds in one of the hospitals that our medical active duty members were deployed to. So just to give you a little background on this, Um, so California was having a increase in cases of COVID that was coming through, which was oversaturating our local hospitals, to the point that these hospitals, staff workers, such as nurses, doctors, techs, were also becoming sick with COVID. One hospital had over 70 nurses who had um, contracted COVID, and unfortunately, two or three of them had passed away. And so, because of this, these hospitals went to the state, to FEMA, and said, hey, we need help. We are really struggling here. And so FEMA, just if you didn't know, is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And so FEMA sent out a message to the Army, actually, who had been doing all the COVID-19 support in New York, and said, hey, we need your help in California. Can you send some members? And the Army had already really overutilized all their resources, so they were kind of tapped out. And so they went to the Air Force and said, tag, you're it. And so, because Travis Air Force Base is a level 1 trauma center, they decided that we were had the resources to provide this support. And so, as part of that support, not only were nurses, physicians, respiratory techs sent out, but they were like, oh, yeah, we also need to make sure that we're taking care of our medical personnel who are having to work in these hospitals. And that is why they chose to have not only behavioral health support, which is where I fell, but also chaplain support, religious support. And so I was chosen as the officer in charge to head up the very small team, 2-member team, as you see, to support 5 of the hospitals in Northern and Central California. And so what we did is we traveled every week from one area, one region to the next. So one week we would be in Northern California, and then the next week we would travel down to Central California. And so we rotated through each of the teams based on wherever hospital they were located at, and we provided that behavioral health support. Some of our day-to-day type operations consisted of, well, in the beginning, it was more introducing ourselves and really making the rounds to show face. And so we did go into the hospitals and see some of the members that were working. But really, we realized that going into the hospitals wasn't the most productive way for these members to get support, because they were very focused on helping these patients. And so we decided that, okay, maybe it's best that we just hang out at these teams' hotels in the lobby and provide that support, meaning we sent out, so there are these people called LNOs, which were the liaison officers, and they were essentially in charge of communicating important messages and information to the team. And so we would talk to the LNOs of each team and say, hey, we're going to be in the hotel lobby from this time to this time. Let your members know, and they can come talk to us. Well, that it is helpful, but at the same time isn't always helpful, because we weren't always catching members at the right time because they're on all kinds of different shifts. And also, it can be a little stigmatizing to be sitting in the lobby knowing, I didn't really know a lot of people from these teams in the beginning, but for those who did know us, and that obviously we told the LNOs where we would be, the concern of, oh, they're going to see, so the member would come talk to us and they're going to be concerned because, oh, another member is going to see us talking to the behavioral health support, and it's not going to look good. So because we had that concern, we're like, what can we do to form these relationships first? And then they can feel really comfortable coming to us. And that really came down to doing what we enjoy. I am a yoga instructor, and so I taught a lot of yoga, and lots of people came. Free yoga, stress relief, why not? And so I was able to meet people that way. My tech, she is an artist, and so we offered art and meditation classes, so that paint and sip type of environment, and tons of people came to those, and we made more relationships. And then also we always attended the promotion ceremonies because people are still promoting. When I say promoting, from a lower rank to the next rank up. And so any type of social gathering that these teams had, we made sure to be available. We also contacted the USO to provide some snacks and drinks and like little gift bags to just show our support and appreciation to these members that were working very long shifts in full protective gear and wearing those N95s and surgical masks and full head to toe gear is very exhausting. And so just having that support and show of appreciation, I found that they really enjoyed that. And so all of those activities, I say all that to say that that networking and showing face really helped members in the end come to us. I had lots of members come to us expressing concern for being away from their families, which ties into that family system that I mentioned earlier. How their children weren't doing so good because not only were they now on this deployment, but prior to this deployment, they were also deployed for 9 months overseas, and then they got picked up to do this deployment as well. So that is, let's see, that's almost a full year of being away from their families. And so that obviously causes significant stress. And then tying into the stages of grief that I briefly highlighted on, a big thing, I mentioned this earlier, was just the grief from losing patients. The loss of patients. These members were losing patients to COVID in the beginning every single day, and not just one patient, but multiple patients. And so, obviously that was a huge concern for us as a behavioral health support team. And so we really encouraged members to, one, it's okay to be sad, and two, take care of themselves. Make sure they're not abandoning those basic needs, because one thing I always say, and you've probably heard this before, but if you can't put on your oxygen mask first in the airplane while it's going down, you will not be able to put on the oxygen mask of your passenger next to you. And it's the same thing for the medical field. If you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your patients. And so, they found that really beneficial, just having that, even just having someone to talk to. One day we had a group of members just come and basically have a support group. I think it was 5 nurses that just came and they aired their grievances, but they felt much better at the end. So that was my experience. I've not been deployed overseas, but this was my first local deployment, being away from my home. And it definitely was a rewarding experience. And I would say that it was a very momentous part of my career that I will not forget. And a reason I became a social worker in the Air Force in the first place. So, do you have any questions about social work in the military? Well, obviously, I cannot see your hands or hear your questions, but 2 ways. You can email me. This is my email here, to my personal email. Or you can send your questions to Dr. O'Gara, and I will be happy to answer those for you. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. And I hope that this information that I shared with you really helps you become a better social worker in the future.